The lights inside the United Nations Hall in New York City were warm, but the mood was tense. Flags from over 100 countries lined the walls, yet eyes were fixed on one stage. The 2025 Global Peace Sovereignty Forum had promised unity, transparency, and a new dawn for Africa. But deep inside, many African delegates arrived guarded, unsure if this would be yet another display of empty promises. That morning, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., now a fierce independent candidate with global influence, stood behind the golden podium. His speech was smooth. He spoke about restoring democracy, transparency in vaccine distribution, and a fresh start with Africa. People clapped, cameras flashed. But in one corner, a tall, silent figure barely moved. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. His face was unreadable, his hands clasped. He had spoken little since arriving in New York. Some mistook it for shyness, others, wisdom. When the QA segment started, the moderator looked around the room. Then she said, "We'll take one question from President Traoré." He slowly rose. The room leaned forward. Phones tilted. Some hearts raced. He took the mic, paused, then asked one question. If Africa stopped giving you its resources, would your democracy still survive? And then, silence. The clock on the screen behind RFK Jr. ticked, a slow, cruel countdown that made everyone uncomfortable. 1 second. He blinked, but said nothing. 5 seconds. A journalist coughed to break the silence. No one moved. The delegates from Ghana and Nigeria stared ahead. The ambassador from France lowered her gaze. 10 seconds. A woman in the audience whispered, "Is this happening?" 13 seconds. Traoré hadn't blinked once. His eyes stayed locked on RFK Jr. He wasn't angry. He wasn't aggressive. He was just waiting. 17 seconds. RFK Jr. finally exhaled, leaned toward the mic, and whispered, "That's a powerful question." But it was too late. The silence had already spoken louder than any answer. It screamed through TikTok. It broke into YouTube Shorts. It flooded African Twitter. That single moment, that 17-second pause, was named by journalists as the most uncomfortable silence in modern diplomacy. Kids recreated it on school stages. TikTokers set a timer and stared at the camera. Can you last as long as RFK Jr.? But something deeper had been triggered, especially in Africa. This wasn't just a viral moment, it was a mirror. And what people saw inside made them cry. Thousands of miles away, in a small room with a broken fan and cracked concrete walls, an old woman in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, sat with tears on her cheeks. Her name was Mariam Ouedraogo, and she was a retired nurse. She had lived through 3 coups, a famine, and the loss of 2 sons to illegal gold mining in the north. She wasn't watching Hollywood. She wasn't watching football. She was watching a clip of her president, Ibrahim Traoré, asking that one question. When the silence hit, she felt her bones tighten. When the camera showed RFK Jr.'s eyes darting, searching, lost for words, she whispered, "You see us now, don't you?" All around Burkina Faso and across Africa, in Kenya, in Congo, in Sudan, similar moments played out. Fathers stopped fixing radios. Teachers paused mid-lesson. Students huddled around phones in tears. It wasn't just about minerals. It was about dignity. It was about a continent asking to be seen, not pitied, not studied, not saved, just seen. And in that 17 seconds of silence, many felt like the world had finally heard. But what would the world do with that silence? That answer hadn't come yet, but something had started. Something that couldn't be stopped. In the dry heat of Kaya, a small town north of Burkina Faso, 11-year-old Isaka stood barefoot near a copper mine. His tiny feet were coated in red dust. His eyes squinted at the horizon. He had never seen President Ibrahim Traoré in person. But he had heard about him, heard that he was different, heard he once fought alongside soldiers when terrorists attacked a village, heard that he refused a salary and lived simply, like the people. That morning, a young aid worker showed Isaka a video on her phone, the now viral moment from New York. When Traoré asked the question, Isaka frowned. He didn't fully understand the politics, but he understood pain. He had seen his uncle die in a collapsed pit. He knew boys who disappeared after men with guns came. After watching the silence, Isaka looked up at the sky and whispered, "Maybe now, they'll stop stealing." He didn't mean just gold or cobalt or lithium. He meant dreams. He meant brothers. He meant Africa's breath. The 17-second silence wasn't just echoing in embassies and conference halls. It was echoing through villages like Kaya, places the world had long ignored. Back in Paris inside the foreign ministry, a French official slammed his palm on a table. "Why did no one prepare him?" he shouted, referring to RFK Jr. The silence had made France uncomfortable, more than they'd admit. Because the question cut deep. It wasn't just about the US. It was about every Western power that had benefited from Africa's pain. One diplomat spoke up quietly. Maybe there's no right answer to that question. Social media didn't wait. Traoré challenge, RFK 17 seconds. African gold no more. They exploded across platforms. The most viral remix had Traoré's question looped with images of African children working in mines, European stock traders clapping, and skyscrapers rising in cities built with Africa's resources. A French newspaper ran the headline, "Traoré's silence is louder than our aid." And yet, the man at the center of it all said nothing more. President Traoré had returned to his hotel that night in New York without fanfare. He asked his security detail to let the street kids near the hotel receive the leftover dinner from the staff kitchen. Then, alone in his room, he looked out the window at the glowing city and whispered, 17 seconds. And now they see. The next day, journalists gathered around the hotel lobby in Midtown Manhattan, waiting to catch a glimpse of Traoré. But when he stepped out, something caught them off guard. He didn't smile. He wasn't angry either. He was simply calm, as if carrying the weight of every buried truth, every broken treaty, every African boy turned into a ghost in a diamond field. One reporter asked, "Mr. President, what do you think of the online reaction?" He paused. His voice, soft but heavy, replied, "This is not a trend. This is our trauma." He entered the black car without another word. But across New York, and soon across the world, something had changed. Students in Harlem started researching African history that night. Churches held prayer sessions. In Ghana, a radio station dedicated an hour of silence to match Traoré's pause. In Brazil, a mural of his face appeared with the words, "He asked what no one dared." And the Global Forum? They issued a statement calling for a new ethics committee on African resource partnerships. But it was just a statement. And statements don't stop children from dying in dust. 3 days after the forum, a handwritten letter arrived at the Burkinabe embassy in Washington. It had no return address, no stamps, just a single page folded inside a worn envelope. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged. It read, "President Traoré, I am 16. I live in Malawi. My brother died last year. He worked in a lithium mine, owned by people we never saw. He was paid nothing. When I saw you ask that question, I felt someone finally said what we scream in our sleep. I cried. My mother cried too. Thank you." A boy who still believes in Africa. President Traoré read it in silence. Then he folded the letter neatly and placed it in his chest pocket, right over his heart. He said nothing to the media that day. Not a single tweet. Not a single speech. But at a closed-door roundtable that evening with other African leaders, he removed the letter, placed it on the center of the table, and said, "They are watching. the world, the children. Let's not betray their tears. The room fell silent, because they knew. This wasn't about RFK Jr. This was about history asking for justice, and time was running out. The silence had reached the White House. President Joe Biden, shaken by the viral moment and rising questions from African-American communities, requested a private video call with Traoré. No press, no noise, just two presidents on a split screen. Biden started carefully. Ibrahim, that moment, it's everywhere. Traoré nodded slowly. Yes. Biden sighed. You've awakened something, a hard truth. There was a pause. Then Traoré leaned forward, eyes steady, voice gentle but firm. The world must choose, Mr. President, trade or take, partner or plunder, but Africa will no longer bleed quietly. Biden rubbed his forehead. We want to rebuild trust, Traoré replied. Trust is not built in hotel ballrooms. It's built where your boots never land, in the villages, in the clinics, in the mines. Biden nodded. Let me send a team. Let's begin again. It sounded good, but words are easy. What followed next would test the soul of diplomacy, because Africa was no longer begging. Africa was watching, and it had finally stood up straight. The footage wasn't on the news, but it flooded WhatsApp groups across Africa. A young boy, just 13, lay in a simple wooden coffin in eastern Congo. He had died in a tunnel collapse while digging for coltan, the rare mineral used in nearly every smartphone. His name was Josue. His mother had no shoes. She walked behind the coffin, dragging a plastic bag that held his only school uniform. Someone filmed her sobbing and saying over and over again, "He just wanted to read. He just wanted to read." That video was shared under the hashtag RFK 17 seconds. Because those 17 seconds had become more than a pause, they were now a window into a reality the world had edited out of history books. Traoré watched that video, alone, on a hotel couch, the audio on full. He didn't flinch, but when the mother's cries echoed a third time, his shoulders shook. He turned the screen off, covered his face, and whispered through clenched teeth, "No more quiet deaths." That night he made a decision, one that would shock the world in the days to come. Because Traoré wasn't done asking questions. He was about to demand answers. The final day of the 2025 Global Peace Sovereignty Forum was meant to be ceremonial. Just a photo session. A few rehearsed remarks, smiles, claps, exit. But Ibrahim Traoré did something no one expected. He walked back to the podium. No schedule, no permission, just purpose. The moderator froze. The security stiffened. But no one stopped him. He placed a folded piece of paper on the stand, glanced at the crowd, and then slowly tore it in half. The room gasped. He wasn't here to read a speech. He was here to say what couldn't be written. "We've talked of democracy," he began. "But democracy built on buried children is not democracy. It's a lie told beautifully." Cameras snapped. Some delegates looked down. Others blinked back tears. "We do not want aid. We want accountability. We want to know where our gold goes, who owns the land, who signs the contracts, who sends guns to warlords so the mines stay open. Africa has been patient, but now Africa is awake." He stepped back, no applause, just silence, again. And that silence was heavier than thunder, because truth had just entered the room. 2 nights later, a top-secret memo leaked to the press. It was a confidential assessment from a Western intelligence agency titled Ibrahim Traoré, Rising Threat or Voice of a New Order. The document admitted, in plain language, that Traoré's influence was spreading fast across young African populations. That the US, France, and even China were concerned about his ability to reframe the global narrative. That if left unmanaged, He could ignite a resource rebellion that would damage major Western economies. The memo ended with one haunting line: "Africa is not listening to us anymore. It is listening to him." The leak went viral within hours. African students in London printed the memo and marched through Hyde Park with it on banners. In Johannesburg, young activists shouted in the streets, "We are not threats, we are survivors." But Traoré? He gave no public reaction, only a tweet. Simple, chilling. "If you fear my truth more than our suffering, then maybe I was never the problem." That tweet was shared 8 million times in 2 days. Even RFK Jr. liked it. In a rural village in Burkina Faso, 9-year-old Amadou sat under a mango tree, watching the forum clips on a neighbor's broken tablet. The screen had a crack. The sound cut in and out. But he didn't care. He watched President Traoré, his president, speak with fire and calm all at once. He didn't flinch. He didn't bow. He didn't ask for help. He demanded dignity. When the clip ended, Amadou turned to the neighbor and asked, "Is that what a real man sounds like?" The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, that's what a father sounds like." Amadou smiled. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to be a football star. He didn't want to be rich. He wanted to be like Traoré. That night, under the stars, he took a stick and began writing in the dirt. "If Africa stops giving its resources, will your democracy survive?" He wrote it over and over again, because he didn't just want to remember the question. He wanted the whole world to. The day after Traoré's unscheduled speech, international media scrambled to control the narrative. Headlines popped up like panic buttons. "Populist or patriot? Traoré's dangerous rhetoric at the forum." The Wall Street Mirror. "Is Traoré dividing the global South?" The European Herald. "West must reclaim Africa's trust, not its trauma." Global Affairs. Weekly. But their efforts backfired. People weren't buying it, especially not Africans in the diaspora. In Paris, thousands of African immigrants protested outside a TV station, demanding airtime to tell their truth. In Atlanta, Black church leaders quoted Traoré's question from the pulpit: "If Africa stopped giving you its resources, would your democracy still survive?" Even some Western journalists started to turn. One CNN anchor looked into the camera and said, 17 seconds told a story we ignored for centuries. Maybe it's time we listened instead of labeled." The clip of her statement went viral. And in response, President Traoré posted a photo of a child drawing Africa with chalk on a dirt floor. Captioned simply, "Don't be afraid of our voice. Be afraid of your silence." The comment section was flooded with only 2 words: "Thank you." That same week, during a quiet walk through the hotel corridor in New York, President Traoré was approached by a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and trembling hands. She wore no makeup, no badge, just sorrow. Her name was Solange Mbuyi, a Congolese woman who had flown in alone. She had no official position, just a name tag that read, "Observer, NGO." "Mr. President," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I buried my son 2 months ago. He worked for a foreign contractor, mining cobalt, no helmet, no warning, just gone." She pulled out a photo. A boy no older than 12, grinning in a school uniform with a torn collar. "I watched your speech," she said, her voice trembling. "And for once I didn't feel crazy. I didn't feel invisible." Traoré didn't say a word. He opened his arms and held her. She sobbed into his chest like a child. For a full minute she cried so loudly that hotel staff and nearby guests paused. But he never let go. When she finally pulled away, he looked into her eyes and said, "I will carry his name into every room they try to lock me out of." And he meant it. At a specially convened emergency UN panel, Traoré was once again present, seated quietly among delegates. This time the agenda was the ethics of post-colonial economic policy. It was meant to be dull, boring, but it didn't stay that way. Midway through the session, a Caribbean ambassador, a tall woman in her 60s, asked for the floor. She began formally, then stopped. Her voice cracked. She looked directly at the African bloc and said, "I'm sorry. I represented systems I didn't question. I signed deals I didn't understand. I thought silence was diplomacy. But silence is complicity." She looked at Traoré, eyes wet with guilt. "Your 17 seconds woke up something in me that I buried in the name of cooperation." And then, on live global television, she broke down crying. The chairwoman tried to pause the meeting, but Traoré stood and said calmly, "Let her cry. Let the room feel what we felt for 400 years." Not a single word was spoken for 2 full minutes. The whole world watched, and for once the pain was not just felt in Africa, it was shared. By the 6th day after Traoré's speech, something unstoppable had begun. Not in press rooms, not in politics, but in people. Across Lagos, Dakar, Kigali, Kinshasa, Harare, and beyond, people marched, peacefully, silently. Some held up placards with only a stopwatch drawn on them, 17 seconds. Others carried signs that read, "We are the question." No resources, no respect. Traoré spoke, and we listened. Even school children joined. In Uganda, a teacher led her class to hold a moment of silence. When asked why, a boy said, "Because grown-ups finally told the truth." It wasn't chaos. It wasn't hate. It was dignity walking through the streets. And as the movement swelled, President Traoré made one more unannounced appearance. He visited a school in Harlem. No camera crews, no speeches. He walked into a classroom of Black American students, pointed to a map of Africa, and asked softly, "Do you know where your story began?" A girl raised her hand and whispered, "Yes, now I do." He smiled. It was the only time he smiled during the entire forum, and the room filled with tears. The UN General Assembly chamber was packed. Everyone expected a closing speech. Traoré walked in wearing a simple cotton tunic. No gold, no medals, just truth. He was offered the podium one last time. He refused it. Instead, he walked to the center of the chamber floor, held up the photo of Josue, the boy from Congo, and said, "He never got to speak here, but today his silence speaks louder than all of you." And then, he laid the photo face up on the floor. He looked at every delegate in the eyes and said, "This is not about politics. This is not about aid. This is about whether children like Josue are worth more than what's in their soil." The room fell into a deep silence, not awkward, not defensive, a silence of reckoning. Then he turned around and walked out. No applause, no handshakes. But outside, thousands of people were waiting. Not diplomats, not presidents, people. And when he stepped into view, they clapped, not for a speech, but for the truth he carried in his silence. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré returned to his humble presidential residence. He took the boy's letter from Malawi, the photo of Josue, and the drawing Amadou made under the mango tree, and placed them inside a small wooden box. He locked it, then called his aide. "Plant this box beneath the tree in the national square. We'll call it the Tree of 17 Seconds." The next morning, school children gathered as a young girl read the words carved into the wood. 17 seconds of silence change the world. Let your voice never be silent again. Tears flowed. The wind carried their whispers. A continent stood taller than ever before. And across the ocean, those who once ruled finally listened, because they had no choice. Africa had spoken, not with weapons, but with words, wounds, and wisdom. And President Ibrahim Traoré, he never asked for fame, but he gave the world something it could never unhear. If Africa stopped giving you its resources, would your democracy still survive? Now the world had to answer. If this story moved you, if your heart broke for Josue, if your eyes filled with tears when Traoré hugged that mother in the hallway, then don't leave without taking action. Drop a comment below. I will never forget the 17 seconds. Like this video so the algorithm spreads the truth. And subscribe, because on this channel, we tell the stories that the world tries to bury. You just witnessed the story of one silence that shook every corner of the earth. Now it's time for your voice to echo that silence.